Dissimulation is the repeated act of hiding one's true thoughts, emotions, or identity, and presenting a constructed version of oneself to the world in order to avoid conflict, rejection, punishment, or danger. When this is done occasionally, it is a normal social behavior. When it is done continuously for years as a survival strategy, it stops being a behavior and becomes a mental pattern. The brain changes itself according to repeated behavior through a process known as neuroplasticity. This means the brain does not just store memories, it rewires itself based on what a person repeatedly does, feels, and suppresses. If a person repeatedly experiences that being authentic leads to negative consequences, the brain learns to interrupt authenticity automatically. Over time, a stable neural loop is formed. An authentic thought or emotion appears, the brain detects it as dangerous, the emotion is suppressed, and a safer performed response is presented instead. If this loop runs for many years, it becomes automatic and unconscious. The person is no longer choosing to hide. The brain is choosing the mask before the person is even aware of the original impulse. The performed self becomes the brain's default response because it has been repeatedly associated with safety and survival. As this continues, the psyche begins to divide into functional parts. There is a part that contains authentic thoughts and emotions, but is rarely expressed. There is a performed self that interacts with the world, and there is a monitoring part that constantly watches behavior to make sure the mask does not slip. This creates a constant internal tension because the person is always managing themselves instead of simply being. Over time, this division can feel like living as multiple versions of oneself rather than as a single integrated person. Reversing this pattern is extremely difficult because of a psychological and neurological paradox. The very system that was built to protect the person becomes the system that prevents change. The brain believes the mask is what keeps the person safe, so removing the mask feels dangerous even when the environment is no longer dangerous. Authenticity triggers anxiety, not relief, because the brain has learned to associate authenticity with threat. This is why intelligence alone does not solve the problem. A highly intelligent person may be even better at maintaining the mask because they can predict reactions, control behavior, and maintain consistency in their performed identity. What is required to change the pattern is something closer to cognitive flexibility and repeated experiences where authenticity does not lead to harm. But the paradox is that the person must act authentically to learn that authenticity is safe, while their brain is telling them that authenticity is dangerous. So the very action required for healing is the action the brain is trying to prevent. Because these neural pathways were built over many years and reinforced by survival, they are deeply ingrained and resistant to change. The brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar risk. The person may therefore remain in the performed self not because change is impossible in a biological sense, but because the system that once ensured survival now prevents reintegration. In this way, long-term dissimulation can create stable neural patterns that divide the psyche into separate parts, and the deeper and longer these patterns exist, the more difficult it becomes to reverse them, because the mind is trying to protect itself from the very change that could make it whole again.